On today's World Insight, truckers in Canada up in protests over vaccines, other anti-pandemic measures, as police clear trucks from a vital U.S. Canada bridge. What's fueling these protests?
They're asking for an end to all vaccine mandates and vaccine passports.
And a high-tech, environment-friendly Winter Olympics. How the Beijing organizers did it using the greenhouse gas carbon dioxide.
Here is our host, Tian Wei.
Hello and welcome to World Insight. I'm Tian Wei. So far, no let-up in truck driver protests against Canada's COVID-19 vaccine rules. It's an offshoot to the so-called Freedom Convoy protests that have hit the streets of the Canadian capital, Ottawa, since late January. Copycat protests have also sprung up in Australia, New Zealand, and France, while some U.S. truck drivers said they are planning similar actions. So what is the situation right now? Let's loop in our panelists. For more on anti-vaccination protests in Ottawa, we have Andrew Cohen, journalist and associate professor of journalism and communication at Carleton University. In Toronto, Carrie Bauman, who is the bioethicist and also assistant professor from Toronto University. In San Francisco, Peter Chin Hong, professor and associate dean for regional campuses with School of Medicine from University of California, San Francisco. In Washington, D.C., last but not least, Brandon Andrews, entrepreneur and former Hill staffer. What a pleasure to have the four of you gentlemen joining us on this ongoing story. Please tell us about the response from the public regarding the protest. Professor Cohen.
The public is frustrated, but it has endured in Ottawa. They've endured 17 days of noise, diesel fumes, fireworks, and largely, in some cases of intimidation. This is not the whole city of Ottawa. It's what we call the parliamentary precinct, very close to Parliament Hill, where the legislature is. But yet, there has been little done. There is a great tolerance for this, but among public opinion, which I think is turning, great impatience, but not enough to make authorities move in a decisive way in Ottawa. It's different on border crossings.
I see. Mr. Bauman, though, does the argument made by the protester make sense to the general public, though?
See, that's the heart of the problem, is what exactly people are asking for. In a general sense, they're asking for an end to all vaccine mandates and vaccine passports. But look, there's people within the group that are demanding the immediate resignation of our prime minister and things that are just not going to happen. So the lack of clarity on that is a problem, but it's beginning to coalesce as to an end of mandates, which is a tough position to be in, because right now with Omicron beginning to wane and, you know, a fully vaccinated person under Canadian definition is 2, not 3. So, you know, a lot of things have to change quite quickly. And so our governments are very hesitant to make these changes because they don't want to look like they're giving in to these extreme protests.
About the pandemic, about the virus, and certainly about the variants and about the prevention and control, about vaccinations as well. Nobody has the definite, ultimate answer, and yet we are in this very active learning process worldwide. And therefore, Mr. Andrews, how do you compare what's going on in Canada right now, briefed to us by the two gentlemen, to the situations in the United States as well?
Well, everybody just wants to move on, but the reality is we're still in a global pandemic, and yes, we're in a better place. However, if you are a policymaker and you're elected to act in the best interest of the people, you have to be saying, well, you know, there's still a lot of danger here. In the U.S., we've seen even more virulent protests against some of these mandates, against mask mandates, especially when you talk about schools, etc. But now it's trickled up to Canada, and I think we probably will see some similar protests. I don't know what size they'll be, but I know there are some plans, preliminary plans to do things in March on the West Coast and even possibly in Washington, D.C.
I see. Then we need to invite Mr. Chin Hong and also Mr. Cohen to tell us more about exactly what do we know and how is science related to the sentiment in a way. Mr. Chin Hong, can you tell us more about your thoughts of how much we know and what do you make of the mandates?
Yeah, so I think it's great to start from the science. What we do know from the science, even in Omicron times, if you're unvaccinated, you have a 22 times more likely, odds of dying actually, and about a 7 times higher odds of being hospitalized. So this is more pronounced in those over than 65. But nevertheless, vaccines really do save lives, not just prevent you from going to the hospital. And ultimately, we think about vaccines as not just for the individual, but for society at large. If you think about wanting to protect hospital resources and, so that we can take care of people who don't have COVID, which is what hospitals are there for as well.
Yeah.
So I think that, and then vaccine mandates do work. When we tried carrots, a shot for a shot, or ice cream in Beijing, it only goes so far. But really, the mandates have really resulted in a large uptick in vaccinations all over the world where they've been implemented.
So in your words, vaccination, very important.
Yes, it's important on multiple fronts right now for the outcome we care most about. Not just infection, but really preventing people from getting very, very ill.
Yeah, and the hospital being swarmed in a way. Mr. Bauman, tell us more about your thoughts. How do you relate your thoughts with what Mr. Chin Hong just said?
I agree. I'm as pro-vaccine as a person can possibly be. But what certainly has happened in Canada is we have a government that just kept adding on the mandates and adding on the mandates. And, at one point they were talking about, well, in one of our provinces, fining people for not being vaccinated. And, Canadians can be very passive compared to Americans. And we've done actually very well throughout the pandemic. Our death rate's much lower than in the United States. We have high vaccination rates. And yes, we have a radical kind of uprising, but when you talk to a lot of Canadians, they don't feel the mandates are really justified at this point.
Nobody knows 100% about this pandemic. And we thought it was one shot, it became 2 shots, and in many countries it's becoming 3 shots. And when it's going to be, the end of this pandemic, nobody knows. So how are we going to spend the rest of the year and the rest of the years? That's a big question. Mr. Bauman.
Yeah, no, I know. And that's very much the heart of it, isn't it? That's exactly what it is. My prediction would be our government, like most governments, says just follow the science. We just follow the science. There's no straight line really between science and policy. You then have a risk-benefit equation where, the benefits are assumed, and they're usually pretty clear, but the risks are not well understood in terms of what you're actually doing to a society. My guess is that Canada will very quickly start winding down a lot of mandates. I doubt very much that a 3rd vaccine will be rolled into a mandatory vaccine passport or mandate. I think Canada will start pulling out, and they'll never say it was the trucker strike, but I think a lot of it will be, I dare say.
We have seen similar situations earlier that when numbers seem to be going down during the end of certain variants or the popularity of certain variant, restrictions being lifted up, that's certainly in the right direction because people need more space. However, there comes another new variant, and it takes time to implement once again the earlier policies, and there is a time difference, and that time difference makes the death number, the infection number, the hospitalization number going like a rocket. So how do we see these time differences?
This is all unknown territory to us. Governments had to respond to something we knew nothing about. And so we know things now we didn't know 2 years ago. We're 2 years from the beginning of this pandemic. So some responses perhaps were not enough. Some may have been too much. Some restrictions may have been lifted too early. Some restrictions may have been lifted too late. My sense is, I agree with Professor Bowman, that in Canada, we will begin to lift mandates, but that would have happened anyway, I think, and was happening already, and we're following the rest of the world on that. In fairness to governments, we've not been here before in a public health crisis like this before. So some governments have done better than others. I will say one thing, though, and it's been said here just now. Our level of deaths are 1/3 those of the United States when you look at population. So Canadians, there are Canadians complaining about restrictions. By and large, those restrictions, however imprecise, however heavy-handed they may have been, have meant fewer Canadians have died. And at the end of the day, it seems to me, when we're all judged on how we handle this pandemic, how many people died. And Canada, I think, can say that by and large, it's done much better than other countries.
I see.
Particularly the United States.
Okay, got it. Mr. Andrews, now, you work on the Hill before. Politicizing events and politicizing everything, especially now in the current America, is an unavoidable trend. And unfortunately, this pandemic as well. So how do you see politics now still plays its role?
Well, there's a couple things to consider here. One, we've already had politicians, mostly on the Republican side in the United States, express significant support for the convoy, and Rand Paul, a U.S. Senator from Kentucky, has gone as so far as to say, hey, I hope they continue, and I hope they come down to the United States, and I hope we have similar protests happening in the United States. And so I think we'll certainly see similar protests again in the U.S. The interesting thing when you talk about vaccine mandates and potentially restricting who can drive trucks and surface transportation, there was just a big infrastructure bill, one of President Biden's biggest accomplishments of his administration so far, that was passed last fall. In the U.S., there was actually a provision to lower the age to allow 18 to 21-year-olds to drive trucks, so to get that CDL license, because of a perceived shortage in the number of truck drivers, which again is impacting supply chain and driving up prices when you talk about the U.S. economy in particular, and inflation being at really high levels, in the highest in about 40 years. And so I think you'll see more U.S. politicians attach not only the resistance to vaccine mandates, but also attach some of these economic concerns, some of these economic issues to this convoy protest. We certainly haven't seen or heard the last of this kind of thing in the United States. I think there's definitely more to come.
It is not just debate within politics. It's not just debate about science. It's really a lot about the public sentiment, and the media plays a big role. So Mr. Chin-Hong and Mr. Cohen, help me about that. Joe Rogan, for example, you see one after another big names in the media becomes a center of attention by spreading information that government considers as inaccurate and media platforms consider as inaccurate, so they have to take action. Facebook is another example. So how do you see these kind of campaigns are swaying perceptions and also making their marks on what is going on in our societies? Mr. Cohen.
Well, in Canada, those campaigns or that misinformation actually has had not much effect. Canada is among the highest levels of vaccinations in the West. There are very few countries that have a higher level of vaccination than Canada. Canadians embraced vaccinations. They embraced mask mandates. They accepted restrictions. I think one of the reasons for the unrest now is that people felt, well, we've been following the rules for 2 years and we're getting tired. And I don't blame people for getting tired. But the level of disinformation or misinformation and the outlets from which it would come is much higher in the United States than Canada. Americans make the mistake that Canada is the same society. It is not the same society. And our acceptance, by and large, of public health measures has been overwhelming. What you're hearing from now are a sizable but a loud, noisy minority which disagrees. They have a right to disagree. But even among truckers, 90% of truckers are vaccinated and don't agree. They've been disowned. This crowd, the protesters, have been disowned by their very leadership. So in Canada, by and large, there is a commitment to these measures. It won't last forever, and the government will remove them.
I agree with Andrew. In fact, if this audience remembers well that during the Trump presidency, many Americans expressed the wish of moving to Canada, again, because it was perceived as not being as politicized, particularly when you think about a pandemic in the previous administration where everything was politicized. And to me as a healthcare professional, it was really, demoralizing to have masks and medicines like ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine being a mark of political affiliation rather than whether or not it was in a randomized control trial shown to be efficacious. So I think, that is one big difference, I think, in the way that Canada and the US handled the pandemic. One where disinformation, misinformation was maybe not as culturally, part of the ethos, whereas in the US, you have a platform, you can say what you want, doesn't matter what evidence you have. And that gets to your point, Tien, that, you can have all the science you want, but at the end of the day, what gets promoted is based on values and sentiment in the society.
What is the best way from your perspective to deal with the so-called public exhaustion?
I think you have to explain to people. I think you have to understand the desire to create a balance between protecting the public and allowing normal life to return.
With Omicron in decline, not saying it's over, absolutely it's not, but we really, really need to start walking away from this as many nations are. I think that will bring us peace.
Interesting. Professor Chin Hong?
We have a lot of agents now to help people stay away from the hospital, even if you're unvaccinated, like monoclonal antibodies and oral pills. So I think it'll be multimodal approaches, not just all the eggs in the vaccine basket in the future.
I see.
Our policymakers have to give folks, whether they're in the U.S. or Canada or wherever, the certitude they need to be able to make the right decisions for them and their families, for businesses to be able to operate effectively, and also give the latitude to be able to make changes based on where the science has taken us. So if there's another uptick, we need to be able to have the room to do that and be responsive to people raising their voice and saying, this is how I feel. It's an ongoing conversation, but one that we have to have if we're going to be successful here.
Brandon Andrews, Peter Chin Hong, Carrie Bauman, and Andrew Cohen. Really appreciate it. And this is World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Coming up, a high-tech environment-friendly Winter Olympics. How the Beijing organizers did it using the greenhouse gas carbon dioxide. Next. Welcome back. This is World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Committed to hosting a Green Olympic and Paralympic Winter Games, Beijing 2022 has pushed innovation in making the eco-friendly snow and ice. The breakthrough core technology uses carbon dioxide as one of the refrigerants. So how does that work? In essence, the process of evaporating liquid CO2 into gas form absorbs energy, which turns water into ice. That is a great leap, as the energy absorbed is not wasted. Later, by compressing gas CO2 into a supercritical state, the energy is recycled to heat other places in the stadium. Not only is it eco-friendly, but it is also perfect for skating because of its great quality. All these innovations are made possible by Professor Zhang Xinrong and his team from Peking University. Let's hear his story. He explained it step by step. So how it works?
The CO2 cap owns a very good flow and heat transport character. Yes, and we can use the liquid CO2 evaporation process to make the gas states. And by this process, we can have a very good refrigeration. Yeah, for ice making, that's excellent. We can use a liquid CO2 to make ice. And then the gas CO2 state can be compressed to high pressure, high temperature to cross the critical point. Yeah, and then we can have the supercritical states. The supercritical states has a very huge enthalpy energy. So we can recover all the energy from the ice surface, from the ice making process. And then we can recover all the heat, make this very efficient.
Wow, that's fascinating. There seems to be little waste in the process.
Yes.
And it seems to be recycled CO2 can be used for a function that it has never done before, right?
Yes. Yeah.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
So there are about 10 layers if we really check the ice rink, even though it's about only 2 to 3 centimeters, and yet there are 10 layers. So tell me about those 10 layers. What are the functions of theirs? Eventually, how CO2 is being used, which layer?
The liquid CO2 in the tube. And above this liquid CO2 tube, and there's
So it's almost like a floor heating system,
yes,
right?
Yes. And there's some functional layers, such as waterproofing and anti-freezing layer. It's something like this. There's multi-layers, functional layers, to protect the liquid CO2 tube and protect the over ice surface to make sure we can sustainably making a very good ice surface.
According to IOC's rule, it needs to be anywhere within the ice rink, within 1.5 degrees Celsius, so no more than that.
The liquid CO2, we use the liquid CO2 under the ice surface. And the liquid CO2 becomes the gas states. And this is a phase change process. Because the phase change process, the temperature doesn't change. So this time, in our ice surface, 12,000 square meter ice surface, the temperature difference across all the ice surface is less than 0.5 degree.
Wow. Much lower than what the IOC requires.
Yes.
Are you proud of that?
Yeah, I'm very proud. Yeah.
But there was a lot of pressure. I know that the debates would last about 2 to 3 years.
Yes, there's many conference, debate conference, debate meeting. Yeah, we need to say the reason why the CO2 again and again.
That's funny. But what about the cost? I'm sure that's one of the biggest concerns.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, the cost is not high, because usually, this time, our cold energy and thermal energy is all in one system. For example, take the National Speed Skating Oval as an example. And we have a refrigeration system, and we have a hot water system, space heating system, and a dehumidification system, and also preheating system, and a lot of system. But by CO2, we can integrate all in one. So just the CO2, transcritical CO2, the direct cooling system, then can simultaneously make the cold energy and thermal energy for dehumidification, for preheating, for hot water, for athlete, for space heating, for all the audience, all in one system. So cost is not high. Yeah,
so that is exactly how it's being done now at the National Skating Rink.
Yes. This time the National Skating Rink is all in one by CO2. Yeah, that is also what I designed just after the Beijing win the bid for the 2022 Winter Olympic Game.
Were you excited when the plan was finally adopted after so many, conferences, debates, and everything?
Yes, every time I stepped into national speed skating oval, when I look at the huge ice surface made by the CO2, I'm very excited. Yeah.
Did you touch it?
Yes, yeah.
Does it feel good?
Yes, it's. I feel it's. How is different? What is the difference between the real ice we make and the experiment the ice surface?
Now, China has been talking about 300 million people on ice and snow, for the winter sports. Yeah. Now, Professor Zhang, just like everybody else, China is not necessarily shall we say, a winter sports country, because most of China is not covered by ice or snow. Yes. So what about that goal? What does that mean to you as a technology expert?
Yeah, that's a big issue. We should think about it. Because before us, we have two roads we can go. The first, we use a traditional road. That means we use a traditional technology, such as freon technology. So 300 million people, the ice and snow sports. That means we need to consume a lot of freon substance. We consume a lot of energy. So we need to think. We have to think the new road. So that's by using CO2, for example, we can make our ice and snow making system very energy efficient, and also environmental friendly, and also very safe. I think that is a new road, but it's very difficult. But I think we should go this way.
That is the way to go.
That is the way to go.
Great innovation ideas at the 2022 Beijing Olympics. That's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to know more, search World Insight to check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei on behalf of the team. Thanks for being with us. Bye for now.